Welcome back to another episode of the Perinatal Podcast. I have actual chills as I get to introduce today's guest. Dr. Payne Bryson is the author of The Bottom Line for Baby and co-author with Daniel Siegel of 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline, each of which has been translated into over 50 languages, as well as The Yes Brain and The Power of Showing Up. She is the founder and executive director of the Center for Connection, a multidisciplinary clinical practice in Southern California. Dr. Bryson keynotes conferences and conducts workshops for parents, educators, and clinicians all over the world, and she frequently consults with schools, businesses, and other organizations. An LCSW, Tina is a graduate of Baylor University with a PhD from USC. The most important of her bio, she says, is that she's a mom to her 3 boys. You can learn more about Dr. Bryson at tinabryson.com, and that will also be in the show notes. Dr. Bryson, welcome.
Please call me Tina. We're just going to talk about being moms and kids, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
It is such a treat. I was telling you before we started recording, this book I found when my son was under 1. My girlfriends and I had all had babies within 6 months of each other. It was quarantine, and we were like, no drama discipline. That's what we need in our lives. And so I've got highlights. I've got dog ears. We've had little phone chats about it. So I'm really excited to have you. It's great to have you here. And also Baylor, are you from Texas originally?
I married a Texan almost 30 years ago. I got married when I was 22. And so I was really a young wife. But I married a Texan, and I transferred it out and went to Baylor, and I have a son who just graduated from Baylor. So lots of Texas connections, but I was raised in Southern California, and I'm a California girl through and through. And
yes,
I live in Pasadena, California, kind of near the Rose Bowl.
Yes.
And I love it here.
Wonderful. I mean, I am envious of your weather. Here in Kansas, we have all of the seasons, and we have them aggressively. So
I love that. That's a great way to say that.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So tell us, how did you decide to get into pediatric and adolescent psychotherapy?
I never meant to be a therapist, and I never planned on being an author. So my plan from the time I was like 8 years old, I knew I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. That's what I wanted to do more than anything. So I got my undergrad in education, and I was like, I'm going to be a high school English teacher. But then I got married, and we ended up in Kentucky, where my husband was working on a doctoral degree. He's an English professor. And I was working as a social worker, and I eventually got a master's in social work. I was working as a social worker, doing direct services with victims and with like victim advocacy kind of stuff. And then was doing a bunch of consulting. And then I had a baby, and I was like, and now I'm going to stay home forever. And but then my husband got a job in California, which thrilled me because that's where my family was, and I was dying to get back to Southern California. But then my husband was like, my son was like 18 months, and he was like, we can't afford to live here. You have to go to work. And I was like, okay, well, if I have to work, I want to be a professor, because that's a good mom schedule for me. Like, I can be off in the summers and stuff. So let me get a PhD real fast, and then I can be a teacher. I can be a professor. So that was the plan. But I became completely captivated by learning about the brain and the nervous system. I had heard Bruce Perry talk. Many of you know his work. He wrote the book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and he recently wrote a book with Oprah called What Happened to You. Yes. And I had heard him speak, and I was like, I'm so captivated. And for me, I'm a really curious person. So when I was looking at like challenging kids' behaviors, or, like working with people that I was working with, I was like, but what's the mechanism? Like, what's happening here? I always wanted to like peel back the layers more and more and more. So I came across this field called interpersonal neurobiology. And when I learned about it, I was like, people need to know about this. I need to share it with parents and teachers and therapists. And so then I went into the pediatric and adolescent psychotherapy route. And then I had been studying with Dan Siegel, who's my co-author on 4 of the books. And I went to him, and I'm like, I'm in the parenting trenches. And everything I'm learning about the brain and the nervous system shakes up everything that our culture does around seeing and responding to kids' behaviors. And I've got to share this with people. So that's kind of how it came about, was like, I was passionate about what I was learning. I was using it in the parenting moments when my kid wouldn't get out of the bathtub, and when they were having a meltdown about something I thought was so stupid, and all of these things. And then as I started sharing it with other people, it just went like wildfire. People were hungry. You know, the Whole Brain Child came out. It'll be 12 years old this fall, which is crazy, in fall of 23. It's like it's becoming a teenager.
I was gonna say, yeah.
So, but these ideas, you know, when the Whole Brain Child came out and when No Drama Discipline came out a few years later, it was in lots of ways, it was a very revolutionary way to do what I feel like my life's work has been about, which is to change culture around how we see and respond to kids' behaviors and how we show up as parents to help our kids thrive, primarily through the kind of relationship we have with them.
Yes. Oh, that's lovely. And yeah, I thought it was interesting too, because I don't know if a lot of people are aware of interpersonal neurobiology. And I was new to the expression as well in the study when I was introduced to your book. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that looks like?
Yeah, interpersonal neurobiology is a framework or kind of a lens that we look through to understand the reality of life and to really understand ourselves and behavior. So Dan Siegel, my co-author on 4 of the books, is kind of known as the father of interpersonal neurobiology. But what it really is looking at how the brain, which is part of our whole nervous system, and our mind, which is like what we give attention to, and our own personal, individual, subjective experiences, and our relationships, how they all interact to shape who we are. So it's really pulling together lots and lots of fields of science, including like psychology and neuroscience and many, many other fields, to come together to give us a way to look at how we influence optimal development and how we change behavior over time by the kinds of specific repeated experiences we're given, knowing that our brain is always changing in response to experiences. So when we change the kinds of experiences we provide, we're literally not just influencing someone's mind or their character or their behaviors, we're actually changing how the brain works. So I'll give like a very specific example, which is like, if I'm a really impatient, reactive parent, but I start today practicing pausing and taking a deep breath and calming down my nervous system before I react to my kids. And I start practicing that, and I'm going to be imperfect at it, and I'm going to be bad at it, but I'm going to keep practicing it. Once I've done it over and over and over, eventually my brain wires to do that automatically. So it becomes more part of who I am. So that's what's so exciting when we think about our kids or ourselves, is that we have the tremendous power to change. And the more we know about the brain and the nervous system and the role that relationships play in that, the more powerful it is. So that's why I love interpersonal neurobiology. It's really about how the brain changes interpersonally.
Absolutely. It's so beautiful too, because we talk about that a lot in therapy, like in one-on-one therapy, where we talk about the different skills or reaction versus response and the things that we want to hope to get to. And it's like, we don't expect perfection ever, but certainly not a lot of change overnight. But to be able to, the more that you practice, the more natural it feels. Yeah. And so if you find yourself hollering at your kids, if you start practicing these things, that fuse becomes a little longer, if you go with the fuse metaphor, by the practice. I love that.
Yeah, it's really, for me, it's an entire body of science that gives us a lot of hope. And a lot of, you know, one of the big messages in our book, The Power of Showing Up, is that history is not destiny. So no matter what parent we were earlier today or last week or the last 7 years or whatever it was, that we can make a change now. And as we start providing those new experiences for ourselves and for our kids, we create a whole new way of being. So for me, I love that message of graciousness and hope. And that we, you know, really, and there's a lot of science that says we can mess up all the time. As long as we make repair with our kids, it's actually beneficial for them that we mess up. I love that science.
Oh, I do too. It's just very validating too. And it's nice because then they can see us make mistakes and how we choose to respond to that and apologize or make changes or moving forward, I'd like to. And then they realize that they don't have to be perfect. And also this is what it looks like to make a thoughtful amends in the situation.
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like I feel like the more that we're learning about parenting, that things are getting a little better and we're being a little less rigid on the expectations of ourselves, but there still is that, like, the parenting guilt of how you need to do it right and you need to do it all. And I do think it's less healthy for our kids to live in a space like that, for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when I wrote the book, The Bottom Line for Baby, which was it was the book I most wanted as a new mom, because I knew I was trying to make a decision about something, like, let's say, pacifier use or something like that. Like, should I let him use a pacifier? Should I not? I would read, and then I would get convinced one way, and then I'd read something else and it would have a really good argument the other way. And then I was like, well, what the hell do I do?
Yes.
So what Bottom Line for Baby is 65 of the most controversial topics, the things we get the most competing advice about. And it's done alphabetically, so you can just flip to P for pacifier. And it really is here are the main schools of thought. Here's what the science, the quality science says, and then here's a bottom line around it. And really the bottom line in a lot of them, and the overall bottom line of the whole book, is that trust your baby, trust your child, trust yourself. And every family is different. So do what works for your family. And for me, whether you co-sleep or not, whether you do cry it out or not, all of those things, at the end of the day, and of course I have opinions about those things, and there's science about all of those things.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, for me, I'm wherever the most amount of people are getting the most amount of sleep, that's a really important piece of the puzzle. But at the end of the day, what matters most is that we show up for our kids, that we, let me give another example. Okay. So my best friend that I grew up with, we became best friends in 5th grade. We went all through high school together. We actually went to college together. She wore my wedding dress. Her name was Gina. And Gina and Tina were everywhere. We were when we gave presents, it was always from both of us. It was we were, completely sewn at the hip. I was trying to get pregnant. She was not trying to get pregnant. But we both got pregnant, and our due dates were 1 day apart. And
wow.
Of course, this is a thing, right? And what was really interesting is that she and I did pretty much opposite in many, many parenting things. She did more cry it out stuff. I did not. She had a really, really different, she and her husband did things really differently than my husband and I did. And you know what? Her kids are amazing. And you know what? My kids are amazing. And so at the end of the day, the stuff we get really neurotic about and we beat ourselves up around, we focus often on the wrong things that matter the most. And in the moment, particularly with your firstborn, it seems it can activate a lot of this fear-based parent, oh no, if I let my kids sleep in the bed with me, they'll never sleep on their own. That's just not true. And you learn that eventually. But the things we worry about and we think have to be just perfect, or we're going to make a mistake, the more kids you have, the more relaxed you get about that stuff, because you realize every kid is super different. And the things we worry about are probably not things we actually need to worry about. What our kids really need from us is the 4 S's that we talk about in the Power of Showing Up. They need to feel safe and seen and soothed, comforted when they're having a hard time. And then they'll develop the 4th S of security, knowing that their brain will wire to know that if they have a need, we're going to see it and show up for them. That's the number one. And that's what leads to what's called secure attachment, having nothing to do with attachment parenting, by the way.
Yes. But I love that though. It's the 4S, the safe, seen, soothed, that can lead to the security. And it's really fascinating to me. I specialize in perinatal mental health, and I have a lot of younger parents that I work with, and that so many people do feel entitled to provide their opinions to new parents, oftentimes not requested. And
often
unsolicited, and oftentimes, always not the same baby, but oftentimes very different situations. And there definitely is no one size fits all. And I hope that people, if you leave nothing else from here, is that you leave knowing that whatever you come up with for your family is the thing that's going to make the most sense for you in your current situation, versus what some celebrity or your grandmother or somebody else,
the neighbor or the lady at the grocery store. And in fact, I'll just give you all a little nugget, a great phrase when someone's giving, if it's a family member or someone you love or care about, and they're telling you should do things a different way, you can just say, I love that you love our baby so much, or I love that you love our kids so much, and you just want them to have the best. And I really hear you, and I'm going a different way. So that way you're really acknowledging it, but you're setting a boundary. You're the parent, and and people give advice all the time. They're like, oh, your kid really hasn't had enough exposure to X, Y, and Z. And you're like, you don't even know what I did all morning. Like all morning, my kid had, like, for example, we can all be judgy about kids on screens and all that kind of thing. But like, if I've played engaged with my kid all morning long and I need a frickin' break, like I'm going to put on Magic School Bus for my kid. And if they just see that, they're going to be like, oh, she uses screens too much. No, I need a break, so I'm a better parent. So it's we just need people to leave us be sometimes.
Well, that's very true. And I like that. So I like what you were saying. I was like, I love that you love us so much. And I'm going a different way. Shut it down, set the boundary, move forward. I love that idea. I literally end every podcast episode with "Be curious, not judgmental" from Ted Lasso, because I just feel like as I'm getting older, I'm caring less about things that I thought were important, especially as they impact other people's life and have nothing to do with me. And I'm like, why am I taking on this energy from somewhere else? Like, if you want to co-sleep and I think you're doing, as long as I'm not actually concerned for anybody's safety, or you want to use a pacifier and I'm not like, what conversation do I need to be having with you? Right? Like, none is the answer. How can I support you? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I will say, just since you mentioned the Magic School Bus, my son got a cut about a month ago, and he was like, the white blood cells are going to come and help heal that.
Love it.
What? You're 3? What are you saying?
You have those moments like where you're in the car and you're like singing Wheels on the Bus, and then you realize your kids actually aren't even in the car, right? Like, I feel like, that's happened to me. I kind of feel like I would be really happy to watch Magic School Bus by myself without I think it's a fabulous show.
I remember watching it as a child, honestly, and I was so wonderful. And not everything has to be educational, but certainly in those moments that I love Bluey. It's 7 minutes. It's super consumable. And that made me think too, like sometimes mama needs 20 minutes where no one's talking to her or touching her.
I'm a big fan of parental timeout. I'm a big fan of like 20 minutes of my kid watching a show is going to make me a more regulated parent the rest of the day. That's good parenting. So no, we can't judge each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yes. So that's the message for today. Take it away, team, is no judging each other. So.
Don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the graciousness, and we do need to give ourselves more grace. And I think I've talked about it with students. I've talked about it with clients. I teach over at the University of Kansas, and like, what is it that makes us hold ourselves to such a high standard while we have so much more grace for a lot of people, especially our friends and loved ones in our lives? Like, if that were a friend, I would say, oh my gosh, take a break, throw on a Bluey, throw on a Magic School Bus, whatever. But for me, it's not okay. Like, no, but I need to be better. I'm using air quotes strongly here, but like, I need to hold myself to, and no one is able to figure out what it is about, like, it just seems ubiquitous, universal. I have so much space for somebody else to take a break and go easy on themselves, and I struggle to do that for myself.
Totally. And we oftentimes like we'll be hard on ourselves, like, oh, it's my fault if something bad's going on, but we almost never take credit when something good's going on.
Hello.
We'll be like, oh, I just got lucky. And you're like, no, like so I think we tend to, like, around negative emotions or negative outcomes, we tend to take that on. But when it comes to positive emotions and positive outcomes, we don't. So I think I do some consulting and coaching with some elite athletes, and that's an issue we talk about all the time. It's like, if a race goes bad, they beat themselves up, but if a race goes good, they're like, oh, I got really lucky, the weather was good. And it's like, no, let's and we do that so much as parents. Goodness.
Yes. Okay, we'll have to have this conversation later, but like, my dream is to get a PhD and do sports and performance. So that could be a whole other
and I do have to say, earlier I said I want to stay home. I did get the PhD, and I did it while I was like, I had 2 babies while I was in the PhD program, and I was learning interpersonal neurobiology, studying with Dan, and I was like sitting in LA traffic thinking about, like, what does this look like in the everyday discipline moments and things like that. And fortunately, because my husband's an English professor and we co-own our business together, our clinical practice called the Center for Connection, like, we just really co-parented and shared the workload. And I was able to just really, even while I wrote books and while I started this clinical practice and was doing psychotherapy, I did a lot of work after kids went to bed, and I was really able to be super engaged in my kids' lives. They're old now. My kids are 23, 20, and my baby will be 17 this month. And I feel, like I said, I never planned on working, and I'm so glad I did. The reward of being able to do this work has been incredible. And I feel like as parents, we really can do a good job at, we can't do everything all at once perfectly, no way,
Yes.
but we can do different things together, some, lots of times. And so I was able to do the PhD, and I was able to be really engaged with my kids, and I was able to work, and it meant it wasn't perfect. It meant
Yeah.
I probably didn't get enough sleep, and I cut some corners here and there, and we
Yeah.
ate, Chipotle 2 nights a week instead of like organic steamed vegetables, whatever.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
all worked.
Yes. And everyone's doing just fine. It's
That's
yes.
right. That's right.
It is amazing the things that we, like you mentioned too with the first baby, the things that were like, this is so important to me. And then, yeah. So I understand that you have an entire book on this, and it would be wild of me to be like, explain it to me in one sentence. But like, what does it mean to focus on the whole brain child?
Yeah.
What's kind of the elevator pitch of that?
Yeah. The elevator pitch of the whole brain child is that your child's brain develops and gets wired from the repeated experiences that they have, and that we can hold their whole brain in mind by providing them with really great relational experiences. And what we do in that book is to really say, okay, look, if you're a kid, so it's really helping understand how our child's brain works and how we can help them understand their own brain. And to help us see that the way that we often think about things is just not real. It's not based in any kind of fact or reality. For example, tantrums. Okay. So typically when a child is having a massive meltdown, they can't access the part of their brain where they use logic and that they can process a lot of verbal information. But
Yes.
typically when a kid is having a meltdown, grown-ups say things like, use your words, or, you just can't do that. I know you really want to, but you can't do that. And let me explain to you why that's a safety hazard. And so we basically provide these like left brain linguistic logical responses in a moment when they're actually more in their right hemisphere in terms of processing emotion and bodily sensations. And so when we start to understand that, I can think about my child's whole brain, and I can go, oh, you're having a right brain moment, and I'm coming in hot with my left brain stuff. I'm actually going to now respond more with right brain stuff, more nonverbal, more a lot less words, a lot less logic. And I'm going to get you regulated first and back into a whole brain moment where you're using your whole brain, not just your right hemisphere.
Yes.
And then we can have a logical conversation or whatever. So I think for me, it was about, let's understand how our children's brains work. Let's teach them how their brains work. And then we can raise whole brain children. And there are cartoons in the book that are helpful for adults too, that help us understand, how our nervous systems and our brains work.
I read a quote. It was referencing a study, and I apologize, it's not great to reference things if you don't remember what they fully were, but it was talking about how like 75% of the people who participated in the study were operating at a stress level in their nervous system like almost consistently when they were awake. And I feel like that can kind of be applied in the United States. It can be applied probably globally, and it's helpful for us in those moments to help the children, for us to be able to interact with them in a meaningful way that helps them to be able to feel regulated, and also being able to help us feel, I don't want to say in control of the situation, because children, but to feel, what is the way that I'm trying to describe it? Not lost in the moment. Like, I feel like I have kind of an operating guideline of what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do, what I'm going to not say in that situation, versus let's just throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks. What gets you to calm down, air quotes, what gets you to stop screaming.
Yeah.
And so that's a lovely way of looking at it, and that like conceptualizing.
Yeah. And, the very first strategy of the whole brain child is called connect and redirect. And it's the idea that, so much of the time we've been taught how to do this. This is how our society works. We just come in and we solve. But really what's so much more effective in getting the brain more regulated and letting them learn is to connect first, to co-regulate first before we redirect behaviors and those kinds of things. And then when we wrote the whole No Drama Discipline, half of the book is connection strategies and half of the book is redirect strategies. And so it really is fundamental to really everything that we know about as mammals. What we need is at our worst, that's when we most need connection. So whether that looks like a tantrum, or whether it looks like anxiety or bedtime fears, or whether it looks like devastation and sadness or embarrassment or whatever it is, that as mammals, so this applies to us as parents too, that at our worst, that's when we most need connection. And usually what happens is when we're at our worst for kids who have undeveloped brains, still developing brains, it often looks like really bad behavior. And connection is actually usually the last thing that grown-ups were traditionally responding with. It was much more punitiveness and reactiveness and those kinds of things. So in lots of ways, I think, I really wanted nothing short in these books. I had this really lofty goal of like, I want to change culture.
Yes.
And, it's funny, when we wrote No Drama, we had a colleague that we really trust say, please don't use the word discipline in the title of your discipline book. And we were like, why? And she said, because people associate the word discipline with punishment.
Yes.
And I said, okay, well, how about we reclaim the meaning of the word then? Let's totally change. So that's really what we're going for in these books, is to revolutionize culture. And we're not the only ones doing it. There are many, many other people who are also part of this movement, which, by the way, is not permissive. It's funny, a lot of times people say that whole brain child and no drama discipline are like some of the main sources for what people have labeled gentle parenting. And I've never said I'm a gentle parenting like, that's not the title I would ever use or claim, because having boundaries and having limits and expectations and holding our kids to them provides a sense of safety. And it also gives them repeated experiences of not having a green light everywhere they go in the world. So it helps them build resilience. So I don't like the idea of gentle parenting. It's not something, it's respectful for sure, but it is boundaried. And sometimes it requires a lot of grown-ups to be in charge.
I'm glad that you've made that distinction too, because it's so tough. Social media does so much for us, and we've come a long way in so many ways. And it's tough because people will catch a buzzword or read a meme and consider themselves an expert or conflate the idea and start talking about things. And that's not the same thing. No drama discipline versus gentle parenting. And it's good to be able to understand what those differences are. And I appreciate you being able to share that. And I love that idea too, because my husband and I joke, my son, who just turned 4, like, he's not very coachable at the moment. And so we talk about, like, all we can continue to do is continue to set boundaries, continue to try to let him know, like, when you're kicking the soccer ball, this is where the goal is. Like, that's just the rule of the game. Also have fun, because you're at the time 3, like, but the limitations and the boundaries are what very help. It's what causes people to feel safe. And even though they might not be smiling and doing backflips over the boundaries, it's how they feel secure.
And parents included. I often have people who come to my talks or whatever, and one of the questions I get is like, okay, I know what not to do, but I don't know what to do. And I think part of it is because with social media and things like that, I think parents have misunderstood that what they're supposed to be doing is like sitting in their child's feelings for hours. Like, you don't want to go to bed. I know it's so hard. And they do all this beautiful emotional responsiveness, but it drags on and on. So then parents are like, what the heck do I do? So I think it's really, in No Drama Discipline, let me just give first, before I do, I have to just say, bless you for having a 4-year-old. I found 4 to be the very hardest age. And I mean, even through my son's teenage years, 4 was the very, very hardest. I think they're incredible because they're brilliant and they have all these amazing cognitive advances and all these motor advances. So their bodies can do incredible things, but they have zero emotional breaks and they have terrible judgment. So it's like the worst combination. And I will say too, that we know that between ages 3 and 5 is the largest, longest window of right brain growth spurt that's happening. So, in the Whole Brain Child, we talk about how when our kids are not in regulated states. They're kind of like on the bank of the river of chaos, or they're on the bank of the river of rigidity, or they might just be jumping back and forth, and they're not in the river of well-being where they're flexible and adaptive and stable.
Oh my gosh.
So he probably lives on the banks of rigidity and chaos. But what's incredible is that we know that between 3 and 5, there's this huge right hemisphere brain surge, which allows them to really play and experiment with and try on emotions. This is why tantrums are happening around 3 and into 4. But by the time they're 5 or 5.5, they are much more rational creatures. And starting around age 5, they have a huge brain growth spurt in the left hemisphere between age 5 and about 7.5 to 7.75. And this is why reading comes online typically at this point, because the left brain capacity is required for that. So it's really interesting to think about these, how the hemispheres specialize in different things, and their spurts of growth really help us understand why 4 is so hard.
He just turned 4, so yeah.
It's tough. It's really tough. They're amazing. They're amazing. And really challenging.
Yes, hilarious, curious, you're right, the physical part. I mean, some of the stuff he can do and the jumps and everything, it's wonderful. And then also, I like it, you said living on the banks of chaos and rigidity and bouncing between the two is really a pretty accurate description.
And Meg, really what we talk about in all of the books is that the challenging moments, the discipline moments, the moments of meltdowns, all of these things are actually opportunities to give our kids the kinds of experiences that allow them to kind of expand the river, so they don't live on the banks of chaos and rigidity as much, and instead they're in this river of well-being where they're regulated, and they have emotional and cognitive and behavioral agility to kind of shift and navigate things with resilience. And the way that happens is how we handle these everyday moments. And what else contributes to that amazing thing that we want is nothing to do with us. So I just want to say that too, is that we can trust development. And as development unfolds, our kids have greater and greater capacity that has nothing to do with us. So we don't have to hold the pressure of all of that. Every moment does not have to be so precious. You don't have to have a reflective dialogue with your child every moment of every little emotional ping during the day. It's really about trusting development to unfold. And typically when I have anxiety around, like, is my kid where they're supposed to be? Shouldn't he be able to do this by now, etc.? Or like, is he on track? Whenever I think about like whatever the particular skill is, like, let's say it's getting homework turned in on time. Okay. I'm like, okay, is he doing better at that now than he was 6 months ago? And when you have really little kids, just think 2 or 3 months ago. Are we seeing less meltdowns? Are we seeing whatever? And generally that can be helpful. It's not 100% perfect in terms of our lens, because I will say, and this is just to warn you and give you a heads up, typically around ages 5 to 7, kids have another spurt of separation anxiety. And this is typically where, and it can start as early as 4, they previously would go to the bathroom by themselves, or they previously would go into their room or go into another part of the house or go into the yard by themselves. But all of a sudden they want you to go with them everywhere, and they're nervous about it. And the reason for that is because they've had another brain growth spurt that allows them to cognitively imagine scarier things happening, including even something bad happening to their parents. But development is not synchronous. So emotional development and cognitive development don't happen at the same time.
Well, that's a fact.
A cognitive spurt, and then the emotional spurt will come, but it's behind it. And so they don't have the emotional agility and resilience to handle those big new thoughts. So they feel afraid. Now, often in our culture, we're like, well, you don't want to coddle them. So you just be like, you're a big boy, you can handle it, which, it's fun. It's great sometimes to say to our kids, I trust that you can handle this. That's a really great thing to tell our kids sometimes. But when they're vulnerable in terms of fear, particularly, we want them to feel safe. And when they feel safe enough, they will move toward autonomy. So I think this leads right into the discipline stuff. We are wrong about how we can spoil our kids. You cannot, and this is based on decades and decades of research, you cannot spoil your kid with too much affection, You can't spoil them with too much love or attention. Like when people talk about, oh, she's just trying to get attention and you should ignore that bad behavior. That's just old science.
Uh-huh.
So we're not going to spoil them with our attention. Attention is a need. And
Mm-hmm.
when they are doing what people refer to as attention seeking behaviors, it's actually
Yes.
connection seeking behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have our attention on them, they can be more regulated. So they're seeking regulation during that time. We can't spoil them with too much emotional responsiveness. Where we can spoil them, where we can go wrong, is if we don't have limits and boundaries and expectations. There's a huge difference, and I'll use this as an example. I think it's fine sometimes for parents to change their mind about a boundary even. There's a huge difference. Let's say you're a mom, walk into your car and you're schlepping like a pack mule. You've got 16 buckets and your kid's favorite bucket's way up on your arm. And then you've got 4 more buckets and you're carrying a backpack and a baby and a stroller and you've got a 4-year-old and you're just trying to get to the car and it's 100 degrees and you're hungry and you haven't peed by yourself in 4 years and
Wow.
it's just a moment, right?
Yes.
So if the kid is crying and whining, I want my bucket, I want it right now. Okay, so here are some good options. One good option is to say, buddy, I know you love your bucket and you really want your bucket right now. I can't set it down. And it's okay if you need to be sad about that. I'm right here with you while you're sad. So
Oh, I
you're
love
saying
that. Yeah.
no to a behavior. No, I'm not stopping and putting everything down to give you what you want right now. That's not going to work for me. But I'm going to say yes to your to your experience. So I'm saying no to a behavior, but yes to the child. Another great response is it's okay to change your mind. If you say, you know what, buddy, this bucket is so important to you and we have time. Sure. I can set these things down and hand you your bucket right now. No problem. Okay.
Yeah.
That's totally fine too. What we don't want to do is say fine and throw everything down and be like, here's your bucket.
Yes.
Because what happens there is, first of all, we're being kind of reactive and unpredictable and aggressive in tone, which we try not to do. But it's not going to damage your child if you do that. Later, you just repair. You go, you know what? Mommy had a gruff tone in the car. I wish I had said that nicer. Can I have a do-over? Whatever. That's fine too. But what happens is when our kids push, which inevitably they do, and we are like, okay, fine, you can have another story.
Mm-hmm.
That giving in gives them an experience where it's like, oh, if I push hard enough or I cry loud enough or I yell loud enough, I'm going to get what I want. And they're brilliant. They wire that. So, if your kid is like, I really want one more story, or and they're pushing, and maybe you've already said no more stories. You can say, you know what? I've changed my mind. We got through that last story a little quicker. We've got a few more minutes, but then this will be the last one. And then you hold that boundary. But giving in is very different from still being the one in charge and making a decision.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I love that so much. And it's so nice to be able to conceptualize that. I love the idea that it's okay to change your mind and showing that to our children. I think there's a lot of cognitive rigidity globally these days where I used to think this thing, or I grew up thinking this thing, and therefore I can't change my thought pattern. And so that's something that we can help our little ones develop at an early age. Yeah. And also I love that my 2-year-old, who she's been a 3-nager since like 18 months. I don't know what happened. I mean, I don't know. I know that's not a thing, but I don't know. But so that's the thing. She has just started screaming all the time. And my husband and I go back and have this conversation of like, where is the line between sitting with her in the emotion and not giving in, like for the sake of I'm putting my foot down, but like she's going to realize if she screams, that's going to get her response. And that's what's going to get her. So she's just going to keep doing it. And that, I mean, they're children's brains are really pretty impressive. They really do pick up on that.
Well, and listen, there's a reality of just surviving the moment. If my 18-month-old is screaming for some string cheese and I'm like, you know what? It's not worth it to me. Like, just here, have some string cheese, because the 4-year-old needs my attention right now. So I think some of that is like just getting through the moment and not being too rigid around, oh, if I do this one time, whatever. But overall, we want the repeated experiences to be around, I'm holding a boundary. Like, I'll give an example of a story I love to tell about a time my 4-year-old would not get out of the bathtub. And he was mad about, he had a bunch of Lego guys, his older brother's Legos in the tub, and Luke was really generous in sharing them. But there was one Lego guy that JP really wanted. And Luke was like, that guy's special to me. I don't want him to get wet. So I wanted to honor Luke's, he was so generous and I wanted to honor his preference there too. So I told JP, no, that guy can't go in the bathtub. And then it was like the whole thing was snake bit. Like he was freaking out through the whole bathtub.
Yes.
So I know I've got to get this kid out, and I know I've got to get into bed because he's exhausted. And that's part of the reason why all of this behavior is happening anyway. So the first thing I do is I prepare myself to be the parent I want to be, which means for me, one of the things I do is I put my hand on my chest and my hand on my belly, and I take a long, deep breath where my exhale is longer than my inhale. This is called the physiologic sigh, or the physiological sigh.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do this, when we're like, and we do it 1 or 2 times, it's the quickest thing we know to down regulate our heightened states of arousal. We do it throughout the day. I mean, all the time I'm like we do these sighs anyway, but so I'm holding the sigh, and then I prepare myself and I do a little self-talk, and I say, at his worst is when he needs you the most. If you want to be the calm in the storm, you cannot join the storm, because these reactive states that our kids have are contagious, and it's so easy to like get pulled into them. So I first prepare myself. Then I say to JP, it's time to get out of the bath. You can either get out yourself or I will help you get out. And he says, I'm not getting out. And he splashes me. He's like, this wasn't even a bathtub. I'm not even in the bath. And I'm like, I don't even know how to respond to that crazy logic. Sure. So I say, okay, it's time. Are you going to get out on your own? And he says, no, I'm not getting out. So I say to him, and I say to myself, I'm going to get you out as gently as I can, because I want to kind of I'm like, oh, get out, So I grab him under his little armpits, and as I'm pulling him out, I practice. So this is actually like the 4 S's of safe, seen, soothed, and secure in a discipline moment in action. So I'm creating first safety by not being reactive myself. I'm not becoming the source of his fear or the source of his feeling of unsafety by staying regulated myself. Because if I lose it, it gives cues of like, I can't even stay in control of myself, so there's no way I can protect you. So I'm going to help my kid have cues of safety by staying regulated and by holding my boundary and being predictable. Predictability creates safety. So I say it's time to get out. So now I'm going to practice scene though. As I'm pulling him out of the tub, I say, you're so mad about getting out. You really wanted that Lego guy, and you're so mad you didn't get to play with it. Is that right? And then he's like, yes. And I'm like, I know, buddy, it's so hard. So then I wrap the towel around him and I practice soothed. And this is really the whole foundation of the no drama discipline approach, which I can give an elevator speech in 1 sentence on that in just a second. But if the point and purpose of discipline is to teach him, he's not unteachable. When they're having meltdowns, they can't learn anything.
That's right.
So I'm going to soothe him, and I'm going to regulate his nervous system with something called co-regulation. So I'm going to be like, I'm right here with you. And really, we don't have to do anything. We don't even have to fix anything. It's really about our calm presence and our availability. So I can say to him, I'm right here with you while you're feeling this angry. I'm right here. I got you. And then he calms down within a couple of minutes. And then it's time. So then what happened is he's felt safe, seen, and soothed. So now his brain, just like when I lift weights and I do reps and those muscles get stronger, I'm not coddling him. I'm not making him fragile because I'm comforting him when he's being bad. What I'm doing is giving his brain an intentional experience that I'm going to hope to repeat throughout the days and throughout the years, to give his brain reps and strengthen the ability to go from a dysregulated state back into a regulated state.
Yes.
So he's calm again. And then now his brain knows my mom can handle my big feelings. She trusts that I can handle my big feelings. She didn't try and talk me out of them or tell me they were, that I was being a baby about them, or she didn't try to distract me. She trusts that I can. And then now he's just had an experience of feeling angry and frustrated and disappointed, and it being okay, that he tolerated it. So that's how resilience is built, is by practicing dealing with hard things with co-regulation or with enough support. So that's really how we walk through one of those moments where we're still holding the boundary, but we're saying, so Eliza Pressman, who's one of my favorites, she's a developmental psychologist who has a podcast called Raising Good Humans and a book coming out called The 5 Principles of Parenting. She says, all behaviors are not okay, but all feelings are okay. And so I like that a lot.
Yes. Oh, that's really a beautiful way of putting that. And
Yeah.
I just think about like what you see on TV from when we were growing up, or what you hear of like our parents' generation and before, where it was just like, get over it. Suck
Totally.
it
Why are you
up.
being why are you being so upset about that? Like, I've done all these things for you. Yeah. And that's not helpful. I mean, if someone responds to me that way, I'm like, okay. And here's the thing too, is the brain is an association machine. So things get wired together. So if when my kid shares their feelings with me and I either freak out or I criticize them being like, why are you making such a big deal about that? Or I dismiss and I'm like, that's, you don't need to be that upset.
Mm-hmm.
When I do those things, it does not feel good to them. And so then their brain's like, wow, I shared how I felt through my behavior or whatever it is. And that didn't feel good. So I'm not sure I'm going to keep doing that. I'm not sure I'm going to keep sharing. So what we want to do instead is give our kids the feeling like, when I shared myself with my parent, that felt good. I liked that. That worked for me. I feel cared for. I want to do more of that.
Mm. I know, because I think about that all the time of like, how do you get to a space? Because I can only imagine and envision what it would look like only having a 2 and 4-year-old. But because my 4-year-old for a while now, since he's been about 3.5, is in a space where like he'll lie to say like, that wasn't me, because that's of course he's just leveling up. That means he's able to operate in a new way that his mind can
Absolutely.
understand.
He's got a good conscience, and he's strategizing how not to get in trouble. It's evidence of brilliance.
Yeah. Oh, hell, okay. Hey, I like that. Hello. But so, and it's interesting because I want him to know that he can come here to the safe space. Like the old expressions, like you'll get in more trouble if you lie about it, or something like that. And so it's hard to kind of articulate that to a 3.5-year-old, but also like, how do I get to a space where I've been trying to utilize these tools to, when he gets older and inevitably makes bad choices, as we all do up until the day we die, but to be able to be like, not, oh my gosh, my mom's going to kill me, but I got to go talk to my mom and see, like, have her help me, and figuring out how to nurture that second space.
Yeah, I wrote an article called Pants on Fire many, many years ago when my kids were little and lying. And it's so funny. I always like when I give parent talks, and oftentimes I'm brought in like in school communities where there's a lot of conflict between parents or among teachers or whatever. And I'm like, look, you're only getting half the story. And I'm telling you, even though you think your precious angel would never lie, all of your children are liars. Like, so let me just break it down for you. But one of the things that worked really well for me when my kids were not honest is when they were little, is to say, you know what? Oh, I think we should start that story over again. Rewind, 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 rewind. And why don't we tell the story about what really happened? And so then you're not putting them into the corner. Like, are you not telling the more you back them into the corner, the more they're going to lie, because they're trying to get out of it and they don't want to disappoint you. And they don't want to, the feeling of guilt feels terrible. And so we just are like, wait, let's have a redo. That's a silly story. Let's try that again. And you bring kind of a levity to it.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love it. And God bless my husband. He listens to every minute of every one of these episodes. So we're going to talk about this today after we get home anyway, before it, or when he gets home before it airs. But like, that's going to be a really good thing. Like, what if we just start over? It's non-judgmental.
Yeah.
It's setting a safe space to try again, while also holding the boundary and the accountability of nah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can even be like, that doesn't seem like how I think it happened. So let's just rewind. Let's start over. Let's have a new story. What's the new story? So you just give them a path out. I want to say, like, I think this whole approach to any kind of challenging behavior, like lying or anything else, let's go to this like main thing around the no drama discipline philosophy, which is this: the point and purpose of discipline at all, like why even do it, is to help our children become self-disciplined people. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And the way we get them there is through waiting for development to unfold naturally and giving them lots and lots of practice building skills. So it's all about teaching. And really, when you go to the origin of the meaning of the word, when I talk about reclaiming the meaning of the word, the original meaning of the word is to teach. So if I want my child to become a self-disciplined person, that's going to actually create a lot less drama for me, because once they become self-disciplined, I don't have to discipline anymore because they're handling it. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. The way I get them there is through lots and lots of teaching and waiting for brain development. Okay. So for me, what that means is that every discipline moment is about teaching. when we are in reactive states, when our kids are having big emotions and they're not able to like think things through or make good decisions, which is why the bad behaviors are often happening in the first place, that is the worst time to teach. Because if my goal of every discipline moment is to teach or give them a rep or practice building a skill, then they have to be in a space where their brain is ready to learn. So I often am like, okay, what is it I want them to learn? So let's say my 4-year-old hits his little sister. Okay. So to me, I'd be like, okay, what is it I want my kid to learn? I want him to learn that it's okay to be angry, but not okay to hurt other people. Okay. Part of that I know is brain development. Like he's not going to do that when he's 6 or 7, like he does now. Right. So I'm going to wait for brain development, but I'm not going to just passively wait for brain development. I'm going to give him some practice and some tools, and we're going to work out together. What can you do when you're angry? But I'm not going to have that conversation in the moment. In the moment, my kid is not ready to learn. So I now know what I want them to learn. My next question is he ready to learn? If the answer is no, we go straight to co-regulation. We're going to co-regulate. We're going to provide emotional responsiveness. We're going to calm down their little nervous systems. And once they're back in a regulated state, then they're ready to learn. But the other question we have to ask is, am I ready to teach? Because if I'm reactive, I'm not going to be an effective teacher.
Right.
So it's all about getting them regulated so you can teach.
Yes.
And usually when we think about things like punishment, even like a lot of logical consequences, a lot of those things actually can be counterproductive. I'm not 100% anti-consequences. I think the way we do it matters a lot. But I think that oftentimes our gut reaction is like, you did something wrong, here's your consequence. And none of that has any teaching involved. So
there's nothing to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's how you can evaluate your discipline response is to ask yourself, am I responding to the misbehavior in a way that makes it more likely my child can do it better the next time or not? And if your child isn't, if you're like, go to your room and then and then you can come out in 20 minutes.
Yes.
How is your child supposed to know how to do anything better the next time? Like,
right.
In fact, they're probably more motivated to just hide the behavior next time. So I often think that what we do in the name of discipline makes zero sense if you hold this idea that every discipline moment, and you don't have to take care of every moment, but discipline moments are about giving your child an experience that helps them do better the next time and over time. That's it.
Amazing.
Which means you do a lot of redos, right? You do a lot of redos because then they're practicing and doing it the right way. I have a story I tell about my 5-year-old who hit his 8-year-old brother and left a handprint on his brother's back. He hit him so hard. And the first thing I did was I said, oh, JP, you're so angry. Come here. And he was like, oh, he was so furious. He was red and shaking. He was so angry. So the first thing I did was I was like, come here. You look so angry. And I know that big, intense, negative emotions light up the brain the same way physical pain lights up the brain. So emotional pain and emotional dysregulation is extremely stressful for our children. So if my kid skinned his knee, I'd be like, oh, come here, let me help you. I'm going to do the same when emotions are intense for them. So I'm going to say, JP, what happened? Come here. And I'm going to comfort him. And I'm going to take a deep breath while I'm holding him. If he runs off and says, leave me alone, I'm not going to chase him and force him to be in a cradle hold with me. I'm going to follow him and say something like, buddy, you're so angry. I'm just checking on you. And if he says, leave me alone, as long as he's safe, I'm going to say, I'm going to be in the kitchen and I'm going to come back and check on you in 3 minutes. And I'm right here if you need me. It's the availability of your presence. Some kids do better calming down on their own or playing or other things. So then I can say to him, like, what happened? And then once he's calm, he can tell me the story about how his brother did something mean to him. I validate his feelings. Yeah, that would make me really mad too. And then I can say, it's okay to be mad. It's not okay to hurt anybody. So what can you do next time? And then we brainstorm together. And then we say, let's try that. Let's try that and see if that works for the next time. But I've just had a reflective dialogue with my kid that helps him be more in touch with his own experience, what that felt, what words we use to describe that. And we've set up something to try or a skill to go for the next time. So do I need to throw a consequence at him? No, because had I said to him, go to your room, you clearly can't be with people, I'm canceling your play date. he would have sat in his room and stewed over how mean I was to do this to him, and he would have taken zero responsibility. Whereas in the other time, I say, you really hurt your brother. And then he's like, yeah. And I'm like, you can go make things right with him. And he does have to take accountability. So as you can see, this is not permissive. I'm actually holding him accountable. And I'm responding in a way that moves him into a place where he can learn. And then I provide him an experience that helps him do better the next time. Now, if you have a really little kid, like a 2 or 3 year old, they're biting, you really can just say, like, reflect on the feeling, like you were angry, address the behavior. Biting hurts, no biting. And then the third thing you can do is move the heck on and stop giving so much attention to it. Say, I think I hear birds outside, let's go see. Knowing that
I love that.
as development unfolds, they're not going to bite. It's like they don't have the words and the experience, right? And you may have to be more proactive to protect the other sibling. But I think, and then as they get older, moving into 3 and 4, you can add a fourth thing, which is what I just did there, is to say, what can you do differently next time? And they may not have an idea, but you can share an idea. They might have a great idea.
Sure. Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, I know we've got to get you out of here, but I feel like we could talk for another 60 minutes. So I just appreciate the validation, the ideas, the new way. That's the thing. I think it's very helpful for people to have a new way of approaching things, of thinking about things. And we don't get taught this stuff in school, really. Like, there's no conversation about your left brain and your right brain, or there are sometimes, but not, especially not as it affects, like, I have a business degree and I had to take Psych 120, right? That was 20 years ago. So.
Even doctoral level, like mental health people and child development people, more and more we're getting this, but this is not even how professionals are trained to think about things.
Right. Absolutely. So thank you so much for your time. What a treat it's been. I've been looking forward to this so much. Can you please let everyone know, and it'll be in the show notes as well, where they can find you?
My website is tinabryson.com, and that's Bryson. And then I'm all over social media. I especially love to post on Instagram, and my handle there is Tina Payne Bryson, and that's PayneBryson. And I'm in fact, if you go on my Instagram, I did 20 discipline mistakes that we make all the time, and I've made every single one of them. And it's actually what we have in the appendix of the No Drama Discipline book, but I walked through each of those. So you can find them. They were called Mistake Mondays. And so I did them on Mondays, and I went through all 20 discipline mistakes and told us how to not make them. So there's some really great free content out there. My favorite thing is supporting parents and doing the hardest and most rewarding thing ever, and that's raising our kids. So, and I will take, I do take listener questions on Instagram and DMs. I do make videos and respond to people's questions.
Amazing. Well, again, thank you so much. Everyone, please go find Dr. Tina Payne Bryson everywhere. Thank you again for the time. And for everyone out there, be curious, not judgmental. Goodbye.